Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling a really pivotal moment from the 20th century. That's the Iranian Revolution of 1979 and the transformative rule of Ayatollah Khomeini. You shared some fascinating source material with us, and our mission, like always, is to cut through the complexity, pull out those key insights, and give you those surprising facts that, help you get truly informed.
Absolutely. And it's so important to grasp right away that this wasn't just, say, a government changing hands, not a simple coup. No, this was a deep, fundamental shift. It completely reshaped Iran, yes, but it also sent these huge ripples across the Middle East. It really marked the end of an era, specifically that period of Western dominance in Iran.
And right at the center of it all, this almost larger-than-life figure, Ayatollah Khomeini. He's the leader who ousted the Western-backed Shah, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, and then became the first supreme leader of the new Islamic Republic.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Before the revolution really exploded, what were the underlying tensions? What was brewing in Iran back in the 60s and 70s? Well, you had this really potent mix building up, grievances and transformations happening at the same time. First off, there was intense political repression. The Shah's secret police, Savavak, they were notorious. We're talking widespread arrests, torture, executions. It created this climate of fear, but also simmering anger.
Right, so basic freedoms were heavily curtailed.
Exactly. And then layer on top of that the Western influence, especially American. It wasn't just political backing for the Shah. It seeped into the economy, culture. I think Western companies, Western media. For many Iranians, this felt like an erosion of their identity, their values. It bred resentment, this feeling of being, dominated.
Or loss of sovereignty, almost.
Precisely, and economically. Despite huge oil wealth, the gap between the rich elite, often close to the Shah, and the vast majority of poor Iranians was just massive and growing. That fuels social unrest, obviously. And then there was the Shah's White Revolution. These were his big modernization plans, land reform, women's suffrage, things like that.
Sounds progressive on the surface.
On the surface, maybe? But the powerful conservative clergy, they saw it as an attack on Islamic tradition, on their own authority. So these reforms, ironically, ended up unifying and strengthening the religious opposition against the Shah.
So you're painting a picture of intense pressure building from all sides: political repression, economic inequality, cultural anxieties, and this energized religious opposition, like you said, a pressure cooker.
Exactly, just waiting for a spark.
Okay, here's where it gets really dramatic. How did all that simmering tension finally boil over into open revolution?
It happened incredibly fast, really escalating through 1978. You started seeing mass demonstrations, huge ones. And crucially, the clergy were right at the forefront, organizing and leading. Ayatollah Khomeini, though he was in exile first Iraq, then, remarkably, France, he was the guiding voice.
How did he manage that from exile?
Through smuggled cassette tapes, his sermons calling for the Shah's overthrow and outlining his vision for an Islamic state were copied and distributed everywhere. They resonated incredibly powerfully. His message just tapped into all that built-up frustration.
Wow. Cassette tapes fueling a revolution.
It seems almost quaint now, but it was effective. The protests just grew and grew. The regime couldn't contain them. Eventually, the pressure was too much. The military started wavering. The Shah fled Iran in January 1979.
Just left.
He left, and that paved the way for Khomeini's return in February 1979. It was truly epic. Millions came out to greet him in Tehran, and very soon after that, the Islamic Republic was formally declared. A complete overthrow, driven by popular power.
That speed is just staggering. It really speaks to how deep those grievances ran. But, when you see that kind of rapid collapse and popular support, it's easy to think everyone was completely on board with Khomeini's specific vision from day one.
Were there other groups involved in the revolution who maybe wanted something different after the Shah? Oh, absolutely. That's a really important point. Getting rid of the Shah united a lot of different factions: liberals, secular nationalists, socialists, Marxists. They were all part of the revolutionary movement. But their vision for what came next often differed significantly from Khomeini's. They might have wanted, say, a secular democracy. However, Khomeini, with his immense popular backing, especially from the religious masses, and his sheer force of personality and moral authority, he and his clerical network moved very quickly to consolidate power.
So how did they do that? How did they establish this new Islamic Republic structure?
The absolute cornerstone was this concept, Vilayat-e-Faqih. The guardianship of the jurist. This wasn't just theory, it became the basis of the political system. It grants the supreme leader, the top religious jurist, sweeping religious and political authority. Essentially, it places this religious figure above the elected president, parliament, even the Constitution itself.
That's quite radical. A cleric is the ultimate authority in the state.
It was, and remains, a unique system. It fundamentally fused religious leadership with state power in a way few other modern nations have done. And this principle was locked in place, formally, in the new constitution approved later in 1979.
Okay, so the Constitution enshrines this unique structure. What were the other really defining moments or foundational changes during Khomeini's first decade in power, from 79 to 89?
Well, almost immediately, you had a major international crisis. The U.S. hostage crisis. Starting in late 79, lasting 444 days, revolutionary students stormed the U.S. Embassy in Tehran and took dozens of American staff hostage.
Right, I remember that dominating the news.
It absolutely did. It had huge consequences. Diplomatic ties severed, Iranian assets frozen, and it deeply impacted America's view of Iran and, frankly, its own vulnerability. It also cemented Iran's image in the West as, well, hostile. And domestically, it rallied support behind the hardliners.
And then not long after that, a major war breaks out.
Exactly. The Iran-Iraq War from 1980 to 1988. Saddam Hussein invaded Iran, hoping for a quick victory against a revolutionary state he thought was weakened. It turned into this brutal, grinding war. Horrific casualties on both sides, millions dead or wounded, devastating economic costs.
A catastrophe, really.
An absolute catastrophe in human terms. But paradoxically, the war actually helped Khomeini's regime consolidate its power. Facing this external enemy, this existential threat, allowed the government to demand unity, suppress internal dissent more easily, all in the name of national defense. It created this rally around the flag effect, even amidst the suffering. It forged a sense of shared struggle.
So the war, in a grim way, strengthened the regime internally.
It did. And alongside fighting the external war, the regime was also dealing with internal opposition, and they dealt with it quite ruthlessly. Various groups, communists, liberals, nationalists, even rival clerics who disagreed with Vilayat Faqih were suppressed. There were purges, executions, imprisonments, exiles. It was about eliminating any alternative power centers and solidifying the Islamic Republic's control.
It really is striking when you think about the sheer scale of challenges they faced right from the start. That hostage crisis, a massive war, internal power struggles. How do you think navigating all of that shaped the fundamental identity, the DNA of the Islamic Republic?
I think it fundamentally forged it in fire, really. That combination of international isolation, exemplified by the hostage crisis, and the existential threat of the war. It created this deep-seated sense of being under siege, of needing to be constantly vigilant against external enemies and internal traitors. This, in turn, helped justify the immense power concentrated in the supreme leader and the security apparatus. It reinforced that revolutionary, often anti-Western identity that persists today.
Right. Khomeini himself passed away in 1989. But clearly his influence didn't end there. What kind of legacy did he ultimately leave for Iran and for the wider world?
Well, first, the system endured. He was succeeded by Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, who is still the supreme leader today. So Khomeini left behind this unique religious political structure, the Vilayat-e-Faqih system, which, as we've said, is unlike almost any other government. And it remains, a subject of intense debate and controversy globally. Its stance towards the West, its nuclear ambitions, its human rights record, its support for groups like Hezbollah. These are all ongoing points of friction.
So a system that continues to generate significant international attention.
Absolutely. And fundamentally, the revolution he led completely changed Iran's path. It took it from being this key Western ally, a monarchy deeply integrated into the global system led by the U.S., to becoming a theocratic republic defined by its opposition to that system. It's a profound shift in geopolitical alignment, driven by a unique interpretation of Shia Islam and revolutionary ideals.
And you can still see the ripple effects today, can't you? Influencing dynamics across the Middle East and beyond.
Without a doubt, the Iranian Revolution wasn't just an Iranian event. It was a major turning point for the entire region, signaling an end to unchallenged Western dominance there and offering a powerful, albeit controversial, model of Islamic governance.
And Khomeini himself remains this towering figure seen by supporters as a spiritual guide and a champion against oppression, and by detractors as, well, something very different, a truly complex historical figure.
Landmark is the right word. A religious scholar who became the leader of a mass revolution, challenging both the domestic status quo and the established international order.
So let's leave our listeners with something to think about. Considering this unique system Khomeini established, its endurance and its, let's say, contentious place in the world, what do you think might be the most significant, perhaps even unexpected, long-term consequence of the Iranian Revolution on the balance of power as we see it shaping up in the 21st century? Definitely something to mull over. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you'll continue exploring these complex and fascinating topics.